Hello everybody, and welcome to another Redstone video. Today we're going to be discussing a little bit about ender pearls, and particularly why they are so useful now in the later versions of Minecraft. So we're going to be using Sensei's chunk debug tool a lot. It's super useful, and it's a fantastic feature to understand what chunks are loaded and how they are loaded. And we're going to be using a ton of that. So this is the main setting for that, but I just wanted to shout that out because this is a fantastic tool to use if you're wanting to get into any sort of redstoning or any sort of technical Minecraft. This is something that's really good to have in your toolbox. I'll have it linked down in the description below. Okay, so first of all, why is it important to be able to chunk load an area or load an area that is not loaded within the render distance of a player? Well, the render distance of a player is the area that the player loads around him. So that used to be the render distance, but in later versions of Minecraft, that has actually been separated. So I'm playing on low render distance and low simulation distance here so that we can get a feel for how it works. And so everything that I can see is actually being loaded. And technically it's a square and some of the corners aren't being loaded, but we'll ignore that. So everything that I can see is being loaded around me, but the rest of the world isn't. Now, there's a slight caveat to that in that the spawn chunk radius is always loaded, and that's another thing that they allow us to change. We are able to change the spawn chunk radius now, and you can see there, I'm able to set it to 1. So looking up here in this corner, this is the normal spawn chunk right there. But this is where my player is, and I'm loading a big radius around it. Normally, I have it set to the legacy version of spawn chunk radius of 10, but for the rest of this video, we're actually going to have it set at 1, just so that it's not as confusing. The big area that you see is what's loaded by me. Now, if I wanted to load an area out here where I had a farm, but I didn't want to be there all the time, I would need to chunk load that area. So, how do we do that? Well, there used to be many methods of chunk loading, but they basically all involve nether portals. So I'm using this chunk loader here. This is a pretty standard version of, we have a boat dispenser that it's dispensing this boat on top of the waterlogged mangrove roots, and then it goes through the nether portal, gets broken by this fire here, the entity goes back through, and you get a chunk loader. It also can be done using minecarts. But there is one caveat with all nether-based chunk loaders. So if we go to player here, this is where this chunk loader is existing. You can see here, negative 625, 625. We're going to head back to spawn now. And if we go ahead and take a look, you can see that it's chunk loading a 3x3 area. The green is what we're looking for. Those are entity processing chunks that everything will work in. The orange is where block updates will happen. So redstone works, but your entities won't work. So your sheep won't move around at all. And then the border chunks, they don't really matter, but we'll visualize them for now. So as you can see, this is being persistent and it's staying loaded. But if I do this thing where I exit the world, I then go back in, we're going to load this up here, and we do need to search for it. So negative 625, 625. You'll see it's not being loaded. There's nothing there. Now, why is that? Well, that's because nether portal chunk loaders do not work unless the player loads them first. So whenever you load back up into a single player world, it doesn't load. That is why often you will have chunk loaders break on servers after a server reset. It's a little bit different, and I'm going to be focusing mainly on single player survival mechanics because that's what I find interesting. That's where I spend most of my time. But we can see that this is still working. We head back to spawn, open up the chunk debug tool, and there we go. It is loading. Now, you're probably asking the question, well, what use is that if it doesn't load in between saves? That means I just have to keep my world on the whole time. And that's true. Up until recently, that is basically what you had to do. But I have a plan to fix that. We're just going to go ahead and stop this here. I can remove that comparator. I picked up the boat. And there is a way to get around that, and it involves ender pearls. So I've been doing some thinking recently, and I was looking through a lot of stuff, and I found out that ender pearls now load chunks. So what we're going to see here is this is positioned just directly in the same chunk that this nether portal was. So let's head back to spawn, and let's pull up the chunk debug tool. So if we take a look here on our single player world, the ender pearl is loading one chunk as entity ticking. That's the area that the ender pearl is in. And then it's loading the 3x3 around that as redstone processing. So it's not as large as the nether portal loader is, but it still is loading a small area, which is interesting. That's really useful if we want to be able to use it on reloading. But just to prove it to you, I'm going to go ahead and reload. And whenever we load back in, we should be able to see it. And yep, sure enough, directly on a reload, the area is being loaded. So that's really interesting. And until recently, that was not possible. You had to go physically load that yourself in the world. So we went from being able to load this type of an area sometimes to being able to load this type of an area all the time. Okay, so I'm using a tool from Carpet that allows me to not load chunks while I'm in creative. And that's important to remember for the rest of the video. But so we're going to go ahead, head there, and I'm going to switch over into creative. We take a look at the chunk debug tool. You can see that there's only one entity processing chunk here. But if I go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and put that comparator back in place. We're going to throw a boat in there. Oh, if I don't pick it up. You can see that the chunk loader that we were using the nether portal with is loading the area now. And that's really useful because if we go to the area, you can see now we have a 3x3 of chunk loaded area. But the question is, will it work if we reload the area? And sure enough, as you can see, whenever we reload back in, it gets loaded. So now there is a slight caveat to this, and it's that if I unload at the right time, so by force reloading the world time and time again, I actually was able to get it to break. That's not a surprise. Reloading the world actually takes a really large toll on the way things run in Minecraft. So everything runs in a linear fashion, and whenever you stop it, it actually doesn't do it that way. And so it's not surprising to me that I was able to break it doing it this way by force reloading the world over and over and over again. And we don't want to have the situation where your chunk loader only works some of the time. And so I'm going to go ahead and discuss a couple of options on how we can fix that. The first and foremost being is we're not going to use a system here where it's detection based. What we actually need to do is we need to use a system where it's timing based. So you can have multiple boats in here, and if I set up a clock so that it pulses like once every 5 seconds, that should alleviate our problem. Okay, so all I have here is a simple etho hopper clock with 5 or 6 items in it. Don't remember exactly how many, but what this does is every time this pulses back and forth, it powers the repeat or the dispenser and the dropper, which puts the boat back into place. And so, in theory, if I unload this whenever it's not loading, it still should get powered and it still should load the area. So I'm going to go try and break it again and we'll see if it works. Okay, so after about 1 minute of forced reloading, let's go ahead and take a look. Nope, it's still loading a 3x3, which means that nothing I was able to do was able to stop the chunk loader. I'm going to give it another 2 or 3 minutes of forced reloading and we'll see where that gets us. All right, let's take a look. That was, I don't know how many forced reloads, but let's load this up. And sure enough, it's still loading. That is perfect. That's really what we want to see. No matter how many times you load and unload the world, you're able to keep loading the 3x3 area. So it won't actually, this 3x3 area won't be loaded every single tick. It'll take probably, it depends on how fast your clock is. And you actually want to have the clock running relatively slow, particularly for that type of nether portal loader. But it, it should load up this 3x3 area pretty quickly, which is really useful. So now the question is, what if I want to load an area that's larger than a 3x3? What if I want to load a massive area that spans a large number of chunks so that I can do a lot of things? Now, obviously, this is a kelp farm. It wouldn't work in that regard, but you could do something much larger. Say, for instance, a tree farm or a basalt generator. Well, I will show you. So we head out to that area. You can take a look and see here, I'm actually loading a much larger area. I have, what is that, 12 chunks? Yeah, 12 entity ticking chunks that are being loaded. So how am I doing that? Well, it's through a little bit of clever nether portal trickery. So I have one nether portal here and one nether portal here, and these are loading the 3x3s. But I actually have another nether portal that's way up in the sky that you can't see that is loading this in between 3x3. And this one is important just as the other ones are because you need to have an area that connects from your ender pearl stasis chamber all the way to the farthest nether portal chunk loader that you want to have. It's important that they're all connected because if you want it to be friendly to logging in and logging out, you need to have multiple different, basically safeguards. So you need to make sure that this chunk will load this one, and then it will load this one until that nether portal chunk loader has started working, and then that one will come over and load this one. So I'm gonna double check and make sure that it works using our force reloading method, and we'll see if it still works in just a little bit. And after just a little bit of time, take a look here. Oh, it's not loading it. Okay, that is a problem. Let's go figure out why. Okay, for whatever reason, it seems that I didn't have boats in this chunk loader. I don't know why. It seemed like it was loading it, but so what I've done is I've color coded or wood coded the boats so that there's cherry here, there is dark oak up there, and then this one over here should be oak. Take a look. Yep, it's oak boats. Okay, back to spawn. And this time it actually worked. So you can see here that we have 12 or 15 entity ticking chunks, as it should be. I don't know what was going on last time. Something weird was happening, but yeah, makes sense. Okay, so to cap off this video, I want to show some actual use case scenarios for how we can use our Ender Pearl loading method. And there's really not a better way to do it than to show you my storage system chunk loader. So this is the chunk loader here. It is a minecart chunk loader. And I think actually I'm going to go ahead and replace this because this version was made so that I wouldn't have to enter the Nether if there was a situation where I wanted to load the chunk. I could do it by just pressing a button and it would send an extra minecart through. But actually what I want to do is I want to use the boat chunk loader that we were using previously. But then we're going to have ourselves an Ender Pearl stasis chamber on the overworld side so that it should, in theory, load no matter what. So I'm going to get some materials since this is actually a survival world and set it up, and then I'll show you what the setup is. Okay, so I built another portal. It's still shooting out. Goodness gracious. I built another portal down here at basically y equals 0 because that's the lowest you can go in the Nether. We're going to go ahead, we're going to put 2 of our bamboo rafts in there, and I put a dropper there. Obviously it needs to be a dispenser. Put 2 in there. Then you do want to block up the sides like I had here because sometimes it'll jump off to the side if you don't have these. So then we can go ahead and go through, just double check, make sure everything is working as it should. Oh, yep, I see one there. And you can see just how quick it goes through. Yep, sure enough. Okay, so everything should be working on this side, but as of right now, it's not actually going to solve our loading issue because I haven't put an ender pearl in. So the only check that we need to do is make sure that we're in the same chunk as this nether portal, and we can see no chunk boundaries, so we are, and it's going to throw down an ender pearl. I have ender pearls vanish on death turned to false. If it's turned to true, you would have to redo this every single time that you die, which doesn't happen too often, but still it can be a little bit of a pain. So I have this set to true or to false, and now it should work. So I'm gonna go far away and we'll check and see if this continues loading. Yep, we should see the area is being loaded. So that's really cool. If I go ahead, exit the world, load back in, give it one moment. I go ahead and look again, and you can see it's being loaded. So that's really cool. That solves a couple of issues I had. Hopefully that gives you some ideas of how you can implement this into your world and how you can actually use this. Because I know sometimes people will make redstone videos and not really show any uses for it. And sometimes there aren't uses for it, which is okay. But I felt like this was really good to show a use case for it. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. And I'll see you again in the next video. Take care. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.